What I just played for you was around 20 seconds of the opening credits to Ghost in the Shell. For about 3 of those 20 seconds, there's a very important bit of text that comes up on the screen. Let me just rewind it and see if you can catch it. Did you catch it? No? Well, that's fine. Let me point it out to you if you missed it. Right there is a credit for a company called Manga Entertainment. Why does this matter? Well, it's important because without Manga Entertainment, we would have most likely never gotten Ghost in the Shell as we know it. This credit is an important and very interesting credit, as Manga Entertainment isn't a Japanese company, far from one. Manga Entertainment is actually a British company. Now, if you watched anime during the 90s or the early 2000s, there's a good chance you heard of the name before, and probably even saw their flaming logo coming at you, or a man screaming MANGA! At the top of his lungs, especially if you lived in the US or UK. If you haven't heard of the name before, you may be asking, what is Manga Entertainment and why is a British company co-producing Japanese animated films? To understand how Manga Entertainment came to producing Ghost in the Shell, we have to go all the way back to 1980 with a man called Andy Frayne. Andy worked as the marketing manager and director for Island Records, which in 1989 was bought by Polygram Pictures. After Island Records was bought by Polygram Pictures, the founder of Island Records, Chris Blackwell, decided to create a subsidiary company called Island World Communications. Andy Frayne decided to move from Island Records to this new company, and in early 1991, Andy decided to go to the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London to see Akira. While Akira may be the well-known and highly regarded film it is today, it wasn't very well known at the time, and anime as a genre barely even existed, especially not in the UK. Andy, who had never been interested in animation and certainly never been interested in Japanese animation, was blown away by the film. From the level of quality to how well crafted and philosophical it was, going on to state that I had never seen anything like it. After Andy saw Akira, he knew he had to buy the video rights. Andy, along with Lawrence Guinness, who was the vice president at Island World Communications, entered negotiations with the Institute of Contemporary Arts over buying the rights to distribute Akira in the UK. They were able to successfully secure the rights from ICA, and those rights for Akira are actually still held to this day by Manga Entertainment UK, now sadly known as Crunchyroll UK. Once they had secured the rights, they would later distribute Akira under their Island World banner, with the Manga Entertainment name coming a little bit later. Island World Communications acquiring Akira would turn out to be massive for them, with it being the beginning of the UK's doors opening to Japanese animation. Andy and the rest of the staff at Island World Communications all had backgrounds in the music business and knew how easily music could become a phenomenon overnight. They knew that Japanese animation had the same potential, especially if it was in a similar style and quality to Akira. They also knew that they had to get more of this Japanese animation, traveling to Japan in hopes of acquiring more anime, which they would do, grabbing as many titles similar to Akira as they could. With their first release after Akira being Fist of the North Star. While Fist of the North Star may not be on the same level of quality as Akira, it was similar enough in style to Akira. Fist of the North Star would be the first title to be released under the new Manga Entertainment branding. Even though Manga Entertainment was called Manga Entertainment, they never actually focused on manga, only releasing a couple of mangas under their banner. Most notably Crying Freeman, which they also released on VHS. Andy chose the name manga because the word manga supposedly sounded more punchy and pronounceable over anime. In the following years, Manga Entertainment would carve out a niche but dedicated audience in Britain. The support of this dedicated audience allowed them to expand into other territories, and in 1993 they set up their operations in the United States of America. While manga was expanding rapidly, they came into a couple of hurdles. One of the hurdles they came up against was acquiring and finding big titles like Akira. Akira was something of an outlier for Japanese animation at the time, with its huge budget, well-animated set pieces, and epic scope. It soon turned out that productions like Akira were few and far between, with the cost of acquiring titles like Akira becoming increasingly expensive, along with more and more competition starting to pop up. In response to all this, Manga Entertainment had to fill the gaps with less impressive and lower scale productions. This led Andy to rethinking manga's strategy on acquiring big name titles. If they couldn't acquire them, they would just have to help make them instead. Andy was very interested in pursuing the idea of co-productions, as it would be a guaranteed way of getting a decently animated film that manga could influence in some ways, along with them being able to distribute it in other territories they operated in, and not have to fight other companies for international rights, something which Manga Entertainment found themselves doing more and more often. International co-productions between Japanese companies and Western companies for Japanese animation was not something new in the 90s. They had been going on since the 60s, but they were still quite uncommon in the 90s. Oftentimes, these co-productions would be aimed more towards children's television and would stay far away from anything remotely adult. Notable examples being Toei Animation's involvement with various American cartoons such as G.I. Joe, The Real Ghostbusters, and the Transformers TV show and movie. The Mysterious Cities of Gold was also a co-production between Dick Audiovisual and Studio Parrot. These co-productions were mostly between bigger companies, and smaller companies like Manga Entertainment had a harder time trying to set up a co-production. Andy and Manga Entertainment, however, had slowly been building up a good relationship between them and the Japanese companies, making personal relationships along the way. One Japanese creator that Andy had got to know was Masamune Shirow. Manga Entertainment had licensed a couple of Shirow's works that had been adapted into OVAs, such as the 1988 Appleseed OVA and the 1988 Dominion Tank Police OVAs. Because Manga Entertainment had licensed a couple of Shirow's works before, Andy Fran had looked into his other works, and he had read many of Shirow's works. Andy was particularly fond of one. That one work was Ghost in the Shell, and he saw that it had great potential for a film. Wanting to pursue the idea of making a co-production and knowing the perfect manga to adapt, Andy suggested making Ghost in the Shell into an animated feature to Kodansha. Kodansha published Ghost in the Shell and didn't take much note of Andy's offer at first. He vehemently pursued the idea of adapting Ghost in the Shell as a co-production, and slowly over time, this idea started to become reality, with the Japanese side becoming more and more on board with the idea. It probably helped that Manga Entertainment supposedly helped pay for 1/3 of the $3 million budget the film had. Bandai Visual would also join on as another producer, making it 3 companies producing Ghost in the Shell. These 3 being Kodansha, Manga Entertainment, and Bandai Visual. Production IG would be brought on to animate the film, with Mamoru Oshii being asked if he would like to direct the film. Mamoru Oshii often collaborated with Production IG, and they had just animated his previous film, Patlabor 2, the movie. Oshii initially wanted to direct another film called Jin-Ro, but Bandai offered him Ghost in the Shell instead, and he would eventually decide to direct Ghost in the Shell. With the backing of the 3 production companies, Oshii and Production IG went to work making the film. Manga Entertainment didn't have much involvement with the actual making of the film overall. With the company being on the other side of the world, it was a lot harder to have more direct involvement with the actual in-person production side of things, but this wasn't really a major concern for Manga Entertainment, as they mostly just left the Japanese side to do their work, and according to the Japanese side, Manga was easy to work with and mostly left them in charge of things, hardly making any demands at all. Although Manga mostly left the Japanese side alone, they did ask for some changes to be made. The first change they asked for was regarding the script. After they had read over the script, Lawrence Guinness made a 25-page document on the script, asking for certain things to be changed and making recommendations on others. The changes Lawrence was asking for were discussed for a long period of time with Oshii. It's not known how much of the script was changed because of this 25-page document. According to Lawrence, the changes, while minor, were significant. While Lawrence did make some changes to the film, he also wanted to keep Ghost in the Shell authentic to Oshii's vision and respected Oshii a lot. Oshii himself is a very headstrong director, and he makes his films how he wants to make them. So while we may never know what was actually changed, it must have been somewhat acceptable to Oshii, but this is just speculation on my part. The second thing that was changed was the end credit song. Manga requested that the English language version have different end credit music to the Japanese language version, with the Japanese language version having a track done by the film's composer Kenji Kawai, while the English language version has a track done by U2 and Brian Eno. U2 was signed to Manga Entertainment's parent company Island Records, and Manga's staff used their connections to get U2 and Brian Eno to do the song. U2 and Brian Eno collaborated on the song, and it was included in the album Passengers, Original Soundtrack 1, under the name 1 Minute Warning. This song has caused some controversy, as the UK and US 4K UHD Blu-ray along with the remastered Blu-ray of Ghost in the Shell uses this song on both the English and Japanese language tracks, replacing Kenji Kawai's song on the Japanese version to the annoyance of many fans. Manga UK's 2017 Blu-ray for Ghost in the Shell still has the original credit song on the Japanese language track, but I cannot comment on any other releases. Speaking of the English language track, it also had a couple of changes made to it. Naturally, there will always be differences between the English and Japanese languages, leading to slight changes in the scripts. For Ghost in the Shell, one of the main things that was changed was the inclusion of this line.
What the hell did you use?
Your standard issue, Big Gun.
Mary Claypool, who was the English ADR scriptwriter, added the Big Gun line into the English script as it wasn't originally there. Les Claypool, who was the supervising sound editor and worked on the sound effects for the film, made the Big Gun sound effect to add to the effect of the Big Gun line. According to Les, Oshii wasn't very happy with the Big Gun sound effect and wanted the whole sound effect removed. Les put his foot down and refused to remove the sound effect, stating, "If the Big Gun goes, I go." Oshii backed down and it has remained in the film ever since. Manga Entertainment had the English dub made in time for the film's limited cinema run in the UK, and instead of using their usual British dubbing studio Worldwide Sound, they instead went with the American Animes Inc. Animes was run by Kevin Seymour, and he was quite influential in bringing Ghost in the Shell to the Animes studio. He is credited under the name Quint Lancaster in the film's credits. He is probably one of the main reasons why Manga decided to use the studio instead of Worldwide Sound. Manga may have wanted to dub Ghost in the Shell in the US because an American English dub with American voice actors would appeal and sell better in America compared to a British dub with British voice actors. Manga Entertainment had a lot of money invested in Ghost in the Shell, and they also had the rights to distribute it in America, so there was a bigger incentive to appeal to the larger American audience rather than their smaller British audience. The English dub itself has quite a mixed reputation, with many people pointing to Minnie Woods' performance as the Major as being the worst performance in the dub, with Woods delivering her lines flatly and practically lifeless. I disagree with this opinion, as every time I have watched the film with the English dub, Woods' performance has never really bothered me. I think her performance is fine, and while it does sound flat in places, it never distracts me. The Major herself is almost completely cybernetic, so I interpret her flatter and more lifeless lines as her lack of humanity showing, so to me her performance adds to the character rather than takes away. I will say, however, that Mary Elizabeth McGuinn is the definitive English voice for the Major. So overall, I think the dub is good, with it having some great performances from Richard Epcar as Bato, William Knight as Aramaki, and Thomas Weiner as the Puppet Master. While the dub sounds a lot more professional in comparison to some of Manga Entertainment's other dubs, there are still quite a few moments in the dub that remind you that this is still a Manga Entertainment dub at the end of the day.
Shit! Get out of the fucking way!
There is one other area that Manga Entertainment had some direct involvement with Ghost in the Shell, and that last area was the poster, more specifically, this poster. Ghost in the Shell has a bunch of great artwork. With there being so many amazing pieces of official artwork, it's always been hard to choose my favourite, but out of all of the incredible artwork, this poster has always stuck with me. It's an iconic piece and instantly recognisable to Ghost in the Shell. I remember seeing this image years ago before I had really gotten into anime on some forum and being immediately intrigued by it. I was so intrigued by this image that it was actually responsible for getting me to watch Ghost in the Shell. While the Japanese side had already come up with a couple of poster designs, Manga wanted to use a poster that would sell better in the West, so they got their own designers to come up with some images, and the poster you're seeing now was initially designed by a man called Bruno Tilly. Bruno was the designer at Island Records, and he was invited by Andy to be the creative director for Manga Entertainment, with him designing the manga logo and branding, among other things. For Ghost in the Shell, Manga Entertainment wanted a poster that was similar to the Terminator poster in hopes of drawing in that audience. Bruno, with the help of Sharon Pinsker, sketched up this design and sent it off to Japan to be artworked. A couple weeks later, they got a fully finished artwork back, and it's the same artwork we see today. It's probably the most iconic artwork Ghost in the Shell has ever had, and deservedly so. There's just so much about it that draws you into it. From the Major herself, to all of her robotic parts connected to wires going in every direction, and the cool blue color tone with the city below, it oozes that cyberpunk style perfectly. While the poster is great, it didn't seem to help much, as when Ghost in the Shell did release in cinemas, it didn't have the best box office, slightly underperforming. Even with endorsements from people like James Cameron and critics like Siskel and Ebert, it wasn't enough to save the film in the box office. The poor box office was soon remedied by the home video sales. Ghost in the Shell, when released on VHS and DVD, would become the first selling anime film to reach number 1 on the Billboard's video sale charts in America, with it selling well over 1 million copies by the early 2000s. Sadly, these days, Manga Entertainment's involvement with Ghost in the Shell is largely forgotten, with Manga Entertainment not really existing anymore, and their branding on Ghost in the Shell being replaced by Lionsgate logos on basically every single international release outside of Japan. Lionsgate bought out Starz, which owned Manga Entertainment in the US, and Lionsgate have seen fit to basically put the manga brand to sleep, promising to plan a relaunch that I doubt will ever come. Manga did survive for a while in the UK, but was gobbled up by Funimation, then turned into Crunchyroll UK. Surprisingly, the UK version of Ghost in the Shell is the only version where the manga branding is still proudly displayed. It's a shame to see, but that's just what happens when companies get bought out. I do find manga's involvement with Ghost in the Shell to be a really interesting piece of history for not only Ghost in the Shell, but anime history as well. I don't think we would have never gotten Ghost in the Shell animated without Manga Entertainment, but I do think we would have never gotten the version we have today if it wasn't for Manga Entertainment, no matter how many people want to deny that fact. And that's something to commend Manga Entertainment for, especially for their role in helping open up the West to Japanese animation. While co-productions are more common these days with Crunchyroll and Netflix co-producing a lot of their exclusive anime for their streaming services, there is something special about the way Manga Entertainment co-produced Ghost in the Shell that makes it a story worth telling.